Ireland took firm control of their Six Nations destiny after a dominant bonus point win over Scotland in Murrayfield yesterday. It was a grim day for Gregor Townsend's men, who have now lost 11 in a row in this fixture. Elsewhere over the course of the weekend, France blew up at Twickenham to give Steve Borthwick's men a much-needed win against a big team, while Welsh rugby just spiralled further down after a very disappointing defeat to Italy, which is 14 in a row for Warren Gatland, as he looks possibly likely to lose his job come the end of the championship. Welcome to the Left Wing Podcast. Will Slattery here with you. Delighted to be joined by Luke Fitzgerald and Jonathan Bradley for our match recap and to discuss all the talking points from the weekend. And Jonathan, I suppose you, like me, I think stayed up for the Super Bowl. If you were a Kansas City Chiefs fan and a Scotland fan, I think today would be particularly depressing, but we'll stick to the rugby for now. Ireland 32, Scotland 18, a second bonus point win in a row. Ireland firmly in control of their destiny, as I said. That game against France looks like it'll be a Grand Slam decider and likely a Six Nations decider for Ireland. What impressed you most about what you saw from them yesterday? They obviously came into a 17-point lead, a kind of a sticky middle third of the game, and then reasserted their dominance to kind of win pulling up. You know, the scoreline probably doesn't reflect how dominant Ireland were. What jumped out to you?
Just the start and how dominant they were, how they raced out of the traps. You know, whenever we were in the mix zone after the England game, a lot of the players were sort of alluding to the fact that how England had scored the last two tries in that game had left a bit of a sour taste in the mouth. So to see, I suppose, the real reaction to that in the start, they were so good in the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of that game, building the 17-0 lead. The way that they just dominated the breakdown so decisively across the first half hour of that contest was incredible to see, when there's been such talk about the Scottish back row, there's been such talk about the Scottish backline, but the way that Ireland's breakdown operated meant that they so decisively got the better of those head-to-heads that we weren't really talking about the Scottish backline at all, even before the injuries, which obviously disrupted them so much.
Yeah, the Irish pack really did dominate. I think you could say every single guy who started for Ireland probably outplayed their opposite number, and as you said, pretty decisively. Luke, last week, I guess the show was quite testy in the face of an Ireland win. A lot of people got on to me that, God, well, what's going on?
Keane comes on again.
Oh, has there been a falling out behind the scenes? Like, there was all sorts of accusations being thrown about disharmony in the left-wing family. How did you feel about the second weekend performance from Ireland? Were you more positive about what you saw yesterday than what you saw the week before?
I think one of the telling things was the bench selection for Scotland. I think they obviously realised that's where they've been losing all these games. That's one of the key components behind it, because I think the backlines generally have been, reasonably close, I think, in terms of quality and game breakers and just generally ability. Maybe with the exception of Gibson Park, since he's been in there, he's been so good, but definitely better than his opposite number. But generally across the park, elsewhere, lots of good battles. But the pack seems to be where it's decided, and that's why I think they went with the 6-2 split. Obviously, left them without many, options once the two guys got injured. But I know it's a weird place to start on the answer, but I just thought it's fairly telling, because that was what I think transpired on the pitch, is that the Ireland pack just had way too much. And when you think there was no Furlong and no Joe McCarthy, and even no Henderson to a certain extent, because I did think we looked a little lighter in the second row once kind of Baird was on the pitch. I didn't think that. We just looked a little bit lighter. I thought. Without a kind of a big, heavy second row, I thought we could have done even more damage with a big, heavy second row in there, if I'm being completely honest. So, that was kind of what came out of it for me. I mean, I don't think we had any kind of new learnings. I did expect it to be a little bit tighter, and there was potentially a period where I think Robbie Henshaw got a little bit lucky not to get that yellow card, but it would have felt rough. I think he basically, makes one terrible mistake from the scrum defense, gets kind of fished out of the line, and then he backs it up with what I thought was a fairly cynical. I thought he hit it very well now, but I thought it was fairly cynical. And he was lucky not to get a yellow card. And the game was kind of issuing the balance at that stage. So that could have changed the complexion, but it wouldn't have felt right. I think Ireland, their kicking game was so much better. I thought Prendergast controlled the game brilliantly at the start, and we really got the better of them in the kicking exchanges. But I thought, even though it was funny listening to the commentators, it felt like Ireland were they were right. I felt like Ireland were way on top, but I didn't think they had the kind of, if you looked at the stats at the end of the first half, they didn't have this massive territorial dominance, but it felt like we did, because every time they kind of came down, they never really were a threat, bar the try just before halftime. They were never really a threat. They were snuffed out. They were making errors. Whereas Ireland, on the other hand, were very, very clinical up until that last point, Will, which is the other one I would say, just to, to temper ourselves. We need to finish more of those opportunities. Getting held up all those times over the line, it killed us. It was kind of similar to France in the England game. You don't put away opportunities in these kind of big matches. Even a team that you're way better than, that you're really, that don't look like much of a threat, can still come back and hurt you in international rugby, away from home. So they were the learnings, Will, for me, was that just a little bit more clinical. I just thought, like, there was a blueprint from the first half, aside from getting over the try line, that, like, geez, you could really build on. There won't be many teams that could deal with Ireland in that, when they're in that kind of form. I just thought we were really, really strong and clinical for the most part. And our rucking and handling, I thought the handling was so much better this week, guys. I don't know if you kind of noticed that. Now, I know the conditions were a little bit better, but wow, I just thought the Ireland forwards in the first half, Will, you've heard me talking about that, and Jonathan, that's been the difference when Ireland are playing well. I thought Doris had some lovely touches. Byrne, I just thought it was so impressive to see the guys moving the ball around, not dropping it, compared to the Scotland forwards, on the other hand, dropped an awful lot of ball and contact. So yeah, they were the things that kind of stood out. I know there's a lot there, but I just was really impressed with them. But would like to definitely discuss at some point some of the things that they definitely could improve on too.
Yeah, I do want to circle back to the Henshaw incident in that middle third. But before we get to that, just a few things from what you said there. It's funny you mentioned the statistics and how, like, I went to look at some of the numbers this morning before we did the show, and I was expecting to see this massive disparity in certain areas that I felt Ireland were really on top in, but it didn't look like that. If you just looked at the numbers.
Isn't it amazing?
Like, I
remember them talking at half time, and I was like, then the stats came up on the screen, and I was like, I'm actually right.
In particular, the breakdown, where in my mind's eye watching the game, like, Ireland had a number of key steals and just generally dominated that area, but Scotland ended up getting, I think, the same amount of steals, or maybe even one more, but just they didn't come at, like, they came at the time of the game when it was kind of over, and just the stats look kind of maybe look a little lopsided. The point you made about the points difference is kind of, I think, a good one as well. Like, Ireland won by 14. That was not a 14-point margin. That ought to have been 20 plus. Likewise against England, and we saw them getting back into the championship race at the weekend. That game should have been 15, 20 plus. Like, while they're 10 out of 10 points, the points difference ought to probably be 10, 15 points greater. But that's just, I suppose, a kind of a slight...
Nitpicking. We're nitpicking.
Yeah, exactly, because it was a good performance. Jonathan, what jumped out to me, obviously, the Finn Russell-Darcy Graham, that was a really awful collision, and hopefully Darcy Graham and Finn Russell are on the road to recovery. But I think the game was already taking shape and going one way up to that point. I know the Scotland backline had to rejig significantly, but I really do think the areas that Luke mentioned, in particular amongst the forward pack, like, the game was going that way anyway. Even though Scotland fans might point to that and say, oh, it was a different game after that moment, I don't know if it would have been.
No, I don't think it was. I think the pattern had been established. You mentioned the lack of disparity in the stats, but if you had to check that same stat sheet after about half an hour, it was, Ireland were enjoying 66% territory at that stage. The 2/3 of their rucks were under 3 seconds, compared to 1/3 of Scotland's rucks being under 3 seconds. So those things especially evened out over the course of the game. But I think Ireland had taken such control of the game to that point, and to the point where Finn Russell and Darcy Graham had to go off. I just think the game was already going the way that it went by the time that incident happened. It's always the risk of the 60 split that you're going to have that disruption. And we know how important Finn Russell and Darcy Graham are to Scotland, and the way that they attack, and even just the way that they play. But I just think Ireland's forwards had started so well and were so good in that, as we say, the first half an hour. The other thing that really evened up was the discipline. So I think Luke mentioned how a couple of penalties really let Scotland back into it. Scotland had conceded 6 penalties across that first 20 minutes, and then didn't concede another penalty until, I think, the 50-somethingth minute, whereas Ireland had conceded 1 in that first 20 minutes and then actually overtook Scotland on the penalty count. So there was, I suppose, a couple of areas where, through Scotland improvements and Ireland dropping off the level that they established at the start. But I just think if you're racing into a 17-0 lead in a test match, it's going to be very hard to claw that back for any opposition, let alone one that seems, I suppose, as to have the mental block that I think Scotland have whenever they're playing Ireland, because you think about what happened the last time in Murrayfield with the Ireland's hooker situation. You think about the backline injuries to Scotland this time. They must be thinking that they're never going to beat Ireland, because it just seems to be every time they play Ireland, something else goes wrong. Even, the going back a few years, the Hog dropping the one over the line and things like that. It seems to be this fixture just throws something at Scotland every time.
But Jonathan, you know what's funny? I completely agree with you. Ireland race out to that 17-point lead. You think they're going to kick on and put 30, 40 on them without reply. But it gets back to 17-8 in the second half. Ireland are really scrambling for 5-10 minutes. Scotland are, pouring forward. Blair Kinghorn almost looks like he's going to go in the corner. Gibson Park, I think it was.
Oh, throw the pass.
Yeah.
He had a few of them where he was very selfish, wasn't he?
Yeah, but so as Gibson Park scrambles, the Henshaw incident happens. Off the back of that, Scotland get a penalty under the sticks. They have to go for the juggler there. Like, they're the underdog. Ireland are on the rack. Like, I think Simon Easterby would have been delighted to see that 3-pointer go over. All of a sudden, Ireland are, they're 6, ahead instead of 9. But they get to kick the ball deep back into Scottish territory and reassert their territorial kind of a territorial edge. And they scored a third try very shortly afterwards. The same thing happened against South Africa in November when Scotland had a penalty under the sticks. They were 7 down and they went to cut the lead to 4 when South Africa had a man in the bin. South Africa said, thank you very much, kicked long, won the ball back and scored a try to put the game out of reach. I just think Scotland, who often talk about, an aggressive style and a front foot style, I just thought they had to go for the juggler there. Ireland were really struggling, and I think it was a massive let-off that allowed Ireland to just kind of release the pressure.
But Will, there was another argument to say that, you get back down the pitch there. Like if you look at the two teams, where like one of the big differences for me between the two teams has always been these kind of little moments of inaccuracy that Scotland seem to have. So they catch the kickoff after they take the penalty, right? And they're now within one score. They actually, I can't remember who caught it. It's one of the back rowers, I think, caught it. He gets tackled, hits the ground, and the ball bobbles out. And
Matt Fagerson.
It was a Fagerson, wasn't it? Yeah. And I just remember thinking, that is so Scotland. Do you know what I mean? Like, because then your point about, releasing the pressure valve on Ireland is kind of, I just took it's more kind of, you're more accurate now than you should have been, really, in my opinion. Like, if that was Ireland, I think Ireland probably take that kick off. They have a solid kind of platform. They kick it back down, and they're within a score. Whereas Scotland,
but Ireland don't kick that 3-pointer though, Luke. Definitely not. Ireland 100% go for the juggler.
I think they would if they were. No, if you're in
the
post, no, Will. That's literally like a 99.9%.
But it's on the 5. I'd understand it if it was on the 10 meters out or on the 22, but you're on the 5-meter line. You have to back yourself from that close range to get that try. And then if you score a try there, Murrayfield is lifting. It's 17-15. And I don't think for a second Ireland actually do kick that. That's what I think is a massive difference in mentality. Like, Ireland generally turn down 3-pointers, but I particularly think in the momentum of the game. Because, like, you look at the final score and the totality of the game, and Ireland were definitely dominant. But there was a moment there, and I thought that was the moment. And as soon as they went for the 3 there, I was like, big let off for Ireland.
Ireland were smart then, like, as in they even walked up quite slowly to the kickoff. If you remember, it was like, let's just take the sting out of this for a second. Let these, and in fairness, Scotland obliged by kind of letting them off the hook and dropping that ball, and then it's kind of all, it's game on. Because remember, Scotland had the win with at their back in the second half as well. So if they get it, they have a good chance of catching that kickoff, setting it well, blasting it down the pitch, through Kinghorn or whoever it is, and probably getting the game back going on the halfway line. Or possibly getting a kick return, So I don't know. It's an interesting one, Will. I mean, I think your mentality maybe, like, I do get that as well, because I think, like, Ireland, as I said, that was one of the key moments, was that they kind of got let off the hook with Henshaw not getting that yellow card. But if Scotland, even if they got another penalty down there, the referee's almost going, "Oh, I've got to send someone off the pitch here." So yeah, maybe you're right, but. It was the one moment match. They were still a score away, Will.
Yeah, no, I know, but it was the one moment in the game where I felt Ireland looked a little vulnerable. Like, as in, if Scotland score a try there, it's 17-15. All of a sudden, Ireland's lead, this huge lead, has been completely erased almost. And I just think, I feel like you have to sense that moment and go for it. As I said, it happened. The same thing happened against South Africa in November. They kicked that penalty under the sticks, and immediately South Africa did what Ireland did, which was like, scrag a ball, get the ball back, kick a penalty or score a try. I can't recall which one it was, to push that lead out again. Just while we're on this kind of topic of the middle third, that Robbie Henshaw moment, Jonathan, like we can get all of our opinions on it. I do think he was very fortunate. While the referee's explanation about the tackle motion, technically correct, very rarely see the referees lean on that side of the ledger. Like that's usually a penalty. And given where it was, a yellow card. If I was a Scotland supporter, I would be very, very frustrated and disappointed in that decision. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think there was a decent amount of separation between Henshaw's arm and the Scottish ball carrier. That means that, exactly like you say, that is one that you normally see called a knock on and a yellow card, just because there was still such distance between Henshaw and the tackler. But I think we also have to remember that whenever we're seeing this slow down in replays, slow motion and stuff, it's not a real life situation. It's not the game situation of how quickly that's moving for Henshaw. I think it was genuinely just an attempt to make the tackle. And I think without, the benefit of the replays, I think it does look like it's knocked on the tackle rather than being the deliberate knock on that the replays maybe made it look like.
Yeah, but I feel like,
don't know, it felt to me like, it's one of those ones. So my first reaction, so there's two sides to that. Your first reaction is, oh, like that's not good. Do you know what I mean? Like that's very favourable for Ireland. Is that they were all, Scotland are on the front foot here. Ireland are completely scrambling. He's kind of come off the line. He's a little bit on his own, a little, to a certain extent. Looked to me like he'd kind of backed up a mistake. He was trying to make up for it again. So I do get it. It definitely looks worse and kind of wider when you're looking at everything kind of slowed down. But still, I lean on it. It looked a little unnatural to me. I think your first point about it being a little bit far away is actually quite right, and I think I thought we were very lucky to get away. Like, I think context is kind of important. You think about how much that favors, that's it, what unfolded there favors Ireland and how much pressure they were under. I just feel like that was a very, very lucky one to get away with. And your first point is the key one to me. He's a little far away to be doing the big, the people at home won't be able to see it, but like the big arms, do you know what I mean? He's just a little far away for me for that one. It felt like it was a really smart play from a very experienced international, and referee bottled it, I thought, to be honest.
I agree with Jonathan. Yeah, we keep praising Jonathan's first point, but I agree with it as well. Like he was a yard too far away from me for that to apply as the tackle motion, and I don't think he deliberately meant to knock the ball on. I do think he went to make the tackle, but that's not the point. Like I said, he did knock the ball on, and I think it should have been a penalty and a yellow card, because Scotland again were pouring forward.
He's in a nice position. He's in a nice position where he's like, well, if I get this is great. If I don't, it still looks like you know what I mean?
Jeez, you can't be banking on that decision coming your way very often. As I said, like you very rarely see those not given as penalties now. So Well,
that was the yellow card. I think was the lucky part for me.
Yeah. And that was the passage of play that ended up with Scotland kicking that 3-pointer. So it was decisive. That was, as I said, the one passage of play in the game where I did think, are Scotland getting a little bit of momentum here? Jonathan, a couple of guys just to kind of call out. You could jump in on any of them you want, maybe from the forward packet we discussed, like Andrew Porter and Finlay Bealham, the two props. The scrum went really, really well. Bealham got a really good turnover at one stage. I thought Byrne and Ryan, the second rows, were brilliant. Like that blue scrum cap, whenever you see it kind of bobbing up out of nowhere, you know something good is going to come out of it.
something good's going to happen.
I feel like if he lost that blue scrum cap, it's like, the guy with the hair. I can't recall that Greek mythology guy who had hair. I think he was Greek, but anyway. The blue scrum cap, I think, is the source of his powers. Doris, I thought, was brilliant.
Samson, it's a biblical reference, isn't it?
Is it Samson? Yeah. So maybe not Greek after all. Doris was brilliant again. And you know what? I heard someone make this point, Jonathan. I'll go to you on this one, actually. I really feel like he's settled into that captaincy role. The kind of the infamous interactions with Luke Pearce in the summer in that first test, which Ireland stood over, but I thought he should have read that situation better. I do feel he looks really comfortable talking to the refs in kind of a very kind of pleasant manner, I'd say. He's not kind of gesturing, or he's not being... Occasionally he gets a little spiky when maybe he feels it's required, but I do think he's bedding into that role well, and what's really encouraging is that it's not affecting his performance. He's playing as well as he ever has while managing these duties, and I think it's going quite well.
Yeah, he's definitely not shy about stating his case or Ireland's case. We saw it against England. We saw it again with the Calvin Nash, Duhan van der Merwe situation, where even after the decision's made, he's coming over and he's making the point that the ball goes dead because Calvin Nash is tackled before he can make an effort to get to it. And he seems to be on the right side of the referees while also being forcible enough to state his case as well, which I think is a really good place to be for a captain. But the key thing as well, because I suppose you never really know how it's going to impact a player's performance, especially when it's a player whose performance is so central to what Ireland are trying to do. But his levels haven't dropped. He led Ireland in carries. He was second to Josh van der Flier in tackles, 19-17. For my money, and I'm always wary about saying anything negative about either Prendergast or Crowley in case you get pigeonholed as being in favour of one or the other at the minute. But Doris would have been my man of the match rather than Prendergast.
Oh, yeah.
I thought Prendergast was really good, but I thought Doris was the best player on the park. But you mentioned the props there as well and how well the scrum went. But their work rate for me as well, I think they had... was 30 tackles combined for the two of them. We see it from Porter time and time again. Like his work rate is incredible for a player that plays so many minutes as a loose head prop. It's frightening to behold, really. But also Finlay Bealham, every time he's filled in for Tadhg Furlong, which he's had to do quite a lot over the last couple of years, really going back to that New Zealand series in 2022. He's never really let Ireland down. I think by his own admission, he probably wasn't at the same level in the autumn, but I think he's been good the last couple of weeks, to the point where we're not talking about Ireland missing their world-class tight head over the first 2 weeks of this championship.
Yeah, I actually think that was Finlay Bealham's best Ireland performance, and in terms of what he contributed, kind of in all facets of the game. As you said, the scrum was solid, got that big turnover, his tackle count was really high, and he came into the game with a bit of an injury. Like that, it's funny, like to think back last weekend to the England game, it looked like he could have broken his ankle, maybe. Like someone rolled up on him. So I'm sure there was managing of his training minutes as well. So for him to be able to deliver that performance, I thought was particularly impressive. Luke, Jack Conan had another really good game. Like we debated last week about his best role in this team, and I was saying that I think he's so uniquely suited to the bench role just because he hits the strap so quickly. And again, he came on and was so good. I do expect him maybe to start against Wales because there might be a degree of changing, but come France and that big game, I would keep him where he is. As much as he will hate it, I just think he's so effective in that role. Like, how did you think he played, and what do you think his future in this championship holds?
I don't know if they'll change as much as people think. I think that's a long way off that French game. It's a lot of rest.
4 weeks. Yeah.
It's too much, I think. So I think because you get 2 weeks and two, so I think they won't do that. I think they'll try and put and I think they've kind of left them in that situation by giving England the bonus point where they actually need to go and score as much as they can in each game. So I actually don't think they'll be rotating as much as people think. Nor do I think they really have to, if I'm being completely honest. Like, if you think about where the inexperience lies in the team, it's in the, it's in the kind of 10 slot, which I think they're trying to get him as much game time as possible. It'd probably be a good thing for him to play in Cardiff, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know if they will do that. I think they might just keep it and just, they have a formula that works. They might not try and change it. So look, to answer the question on Conan though, look, I thought he was brilliant. I thought, very accurate when he comes on, makes very few mistakes, but he's very impactful. Like, he's so physical, isn't he? And he's kind of heavy, on the contact. Do you know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see himself and McCarthy coming on together. I think they could really blow away an opposition if those two guys come on and kind of, you give them enough time to make an impact around that kind of 55 minute kind of slot. Like, I mean, wow, you would not like to see them come on. And if it's Kelleher or Sheehan, like, imagine seeing those guys come off. Like, it's like kind of like, it'd be like the South African guys, when you see their kind of, bomb squad come on, you're kind of saying, oh, Jesus, like, this ain't getting any easier, So, he was brilliant. I would like to say, I thought Kelleher, lads, had a brilliant game. I thought he was really, really good.
He was really good last week as well. I just kind of got lost because Sheehan was so good when he came off the bench.
I thought Kelleher was unbelievable, guys, and I thought Sheehan was brilliant last week. Really standout kind of performance off the bench. But I didn't think there was. I didn't think he was unbelievable this time around. If I'm being completely honest, I really noticed Kelleher in the first half. I thought he was so good, and I'm really pleased about that because that's now it's not. Look, I think Sheehan's a better operator. You just get a little bit more out of him in attack. He's, just particularly with Ireland's style. But that's a tight battle again. I think he's in really, really good form, and that we now have a proper 1-2 punch again, because that was one of the real strong points in the team. So that was really pleasing to see that. I actually thought O'Mahony guys carried very well in the first half. Like, he didn't make any kind of standout breaks or anything like that. He looked very strong in the contact, kind of similar to Conan, where he just won an awful lot of the collisions, we talked about, Jonathan made a great point about the ruck ball, and when Ireland were playing, when their tails were up in that game, the ruck ball was really, really quick and snappy. But it makes a big difference when you're winning the collisions, because it gives you clear places where the guys who are coming into ruck, they kind of know who to hit, and they're, the guys in the receiving end are generally in worse positions in terms of trying to get a turnover, and your guys can just kind of target. It gives you the ball, it gives the ball on a platter for Gibson Park. So we focused on the guys in the pack, but I think honourable mentions for definitely for Kelleher, O'Mahony, and I think Conan. Like, obviously Van der Fleer was good. He gets through the work. He's such a good player, but that was kind of a pretty bad mistake between himself and Keenan at the end of the first half, in a period where we had we were fairly dominant. Now, he'll argue that he got back to make the tackle and Keenan didn't need to step in, but he got himself in a bad position that he shouldn't have, like, for a guy as good as him. So that stuck in my head about Van der Fleer, and I was kind of going in at halftime going, this is not a 10-point game, or it was a 12-point. It wasn't a 12-point game. It was a lot bigger than that, and it just felt like they went in off the back of some positivity, when really they should have been picking themselves up off the floor at halftime, whereas they had something to grab onto because of that mistake. But look, it was a brilliant performance by the pack. I thought Ryan as well was so physical himself. You mentioned it, Will, but the guys in the row, like, they get through so much good, honest work. Like, and you can actually see it. Sometimes you say, oh, he got through loads of unseen work. No, you can see it with the guys. I really think you can see it with them. The way that how ferocious the two of them are at hitting rucks. When they're tackling guys, it just really, they're hurting people. And I think when Ireland are playing their best, though, whoever we have in the row, they're really fit and strong, but very physical. I thought that was one of those kind of performances that was driven by those two guys in there. They were the real engine room. And even, like, the thing of the scrum, you need two big guys in there pushing very hard behind what was obviously the guys up front with the technique and that. Those guys are definitely driving some of the results we were getting there. And our pack looked very dominant on the weekend. So, yeah, it's a kudos for all of them, I think, in the pack. I thought they were all really, really great. Bar, obviously, I know I've mentioned the Van der Fleer thing, but look, he still got through an enormous amount of work.
Yeah, just in the second row pairing, I think Ryan and Byrne complement each other so well. Like, because Byrne probably better over the ball, gets a few more steals. Ryan maybe has a touch more physicality than Byrne, but even in the run up to halftime yesterday, obviously you mentioned the cheap try Ireland conceded, but Ryan got a great line out steal from a 5-meter line out. Ty Byrne, I think, helped get in and sack that maul. There was two key interventions by them, and I thought generally they were really, really good. Like Ronan Kelleher, the point you made about how good he was, like Simon Easterby had a comment after the England win about how the starters softened the team up, and I think of Kelleher when I think of that, like those punishing carries, the physicality he brings definitely laid the groundwork for Sheehan to be able to come in and have those eye-catching moments, I think. And then just to close off on Peter O'Mahony, who you mentioned as well, like, I thought he really justified the selection. Dropped 2 balls early on, but grew into the game after that, because Stephen Ferris mentioned it on the RT coverage. I think he played 50 minutes of rugby since like December. So that he had no form to speak of. So it was a kind of a big call to bring him back in. Obviously surrounded by a lot of quality, but just for him personally, I thought he played quite well, and it justified Simon Easterby's selection. So I agree with you. Like, you could single out any of these guys, and you could kind of wax lyrical for 5 minutes about what they brought last weekend, and obviously against Scotland as well. Jonathan, we'll kind of round off the Ireland portion before we maybe move on to some of the other games about the out-half situation. Obviously, it was a lot of debate in the build-up after the England game. Sam Prendergast picked up man of the match from the BBC coverage. Ronan O'Gara was effusive in his praise afterwards, saying he was like a master of control, and God, he's so good now. What could he be like at 25? And then tellingly, I thought Jack Crowley comes on later than I anticipated, and at full back as well, which I found very interesting, that it wasn't the like-for-like substitution, because considering the game was dead at that stage, so it wouldn't have taken much for Simon Easterby to say, you know what, I want to give Jack another 20 minutes at 10. Ireland are leading by 20 points. But no, he wanted to keep Sam Prendergast at the tiller. and play Jack Crowley elsewhere, which I thought shows maybe where the management's thinking, and that Sam Prendergast has a good lead at the moment, potentially. What did you make of basically everything I just said there? I know I kind of threw a lot of things into the pot.
Yeah, I think maybe to look at the flip side of it, it's if you're going to go with a centre on the bench, which we know that both Simon and Andy Farrell before him have been keen to do because they want those three centres in their match day 23 because they're so good, then Jack Crowley becomes the backup to Hugo Keenan in the match day 23. So I think we know how good Jack Crowley is at playing 10. I think it was maybe viewed as important to get him a run in Test rugby at fullback, because essentially if Hugo Keenan gets injured in the first 5 minutes of any of the next 3 games, Jack Crowley's going to be playing there for 75 minutes. So the game being dead, I think actually probably worked against Jack Crowley in that sense, because he didn't get the 20 minutes that he got against England at 10 that he would have no doubt preferred. But because Ireland had the game won, it gave Easterby the freedom to give him a run at fullback, which they may need in a break glass situation over the next 3 games. I think the point that Luke made is actually really interesting. I hadn't thought about it. Because I just assumed that Jack Crowley would be at 10 against Wales, because Wales in the middle of the Six Nations in that third week with the break week either side, because they are the worst team in the competition, we're essentially viewing that now as it was whenever they had Italy in that. And I just assumed that we would see the likes of Crowley, see the likes of Conan come in and get starts. But I had completely overlooked the fact that, we're talking about a guy that yesterday was his first ever away test match. It was only his fifth test. So I hadn't really thought about the fact that they're probably looking to get as many minutes into Prendergast still as they can. So maybe they do keep Prendergast at 10 for that trip to Cardiff. But yeah, I thought he was very, very good. I still think he fascinates me to watch because he has a style that's just, he looks so languid. Things that he does look very effortless, and it's unusual to watch, for want of a better word, because he looks so different stylistically in the way that he plays.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you finish off.
So it's just, I think we're still getting used to watching Sam Prendergast play, and we're still getting used to, I suppose, evaluating his performances, because he does just have this different aesthetic. Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of watching Dimitar Berbatov play football. Because everything he does looks a little bit.
That's really good. Honestly,
a little bit slowed down,
similar.
but he's at the pace that he needs to be at. If that makes sense.
That actually makes perfect sense. And it's one thing I want to say. I'm not comparing these two players in any way, but when Anton Dupont gets the ball, sometimes he has a lot of time on it. People aren't closing him down. He's kind of going this way, going that way, going this way. I feel like Sam Prendergast, for some reason, the time does seem to slow a fraction when he's touching the ball. It's not sometimes he gets crowded out, but oftentimes I feel like for some reason, maybe it's that Berbatov thing you're mentioning, he's moving in a kind of a casual way almost to the eye. But yeah, I definitely get that.
There's one thing I would say, because I actually think it's such a good comparison, just because if you think about the skill level and kind of how they execute their skills, it just looks kind of, fairly calm. He'll hold the ball for an extra half a second closer to the line. The one thing I would say on that is that Berbatov never really started the big matches. And I think there's something about Prendergast where against the bigger teams, where he has to get to is executing on the basic stuff a little bit better. Not every time that you carry the ball are you going to be making that. Sometimes you're just shoveling it. Sometimes you just got to shovel at international level and save yourself for the next play. I thought against England, there was a good bit of that going on where I thought they defended an awful lot better than Scotland. We didn't. They also competed better at the ruck. We didn't get as much go for it. And we weren't playing as well either. But when the game is fast, his style as it stands, works brilliant. And that's what we saw, I think, in the first half, particularly where it was quick ball. Scotland were on the back foot. He had the extra half a second. He could do that one where, he comes to the line and he holds the ball cocked there just a little bit longer so that he can, and then he can still kind of get that a longer pass away. Very similar skill. It was one of Sexton's best skill, is that he could hold that ball there right until the end. Most people bring it into here when they're running or it's not in the right position to pass. He just holds it here the whole way through, no matter how close he gets to. Sorry, the microphone's moving away from my mouth while I'm showing you this. But it's an unbelievably difficult skill to master, and he's mastered that skill already. The issue for me is that if you're on the back foot, executing a lot. Like, I still think he's a little slow to get the ball to the boot. I thought it worked brilliantly when he had a little bit more time yesterday when Scotland weren't competing. You know, there was ones where he kind of dummied a lot of guys and ended up kicking. Better teams will have a guy on the inside there trailing a guy who's coming on, who's chasing down on the foot to try and get the block down. He mightn't get an opportunity to kind of boot a 60-meter kick down the pitch against most teams, or hold the ball that little bit longer. And that's the learning for him. And that's why I think it's really important that, you know, he can, or he gets more minutes, is that sometimes you just got to shovel. Sometimes you got to hand it off to the running back, considering the, we're just straight off the Super Bowl. Sometimes you got to do that. It's not, and then what it does is it opens up the other ones when you're on the front foot. I think where his big difference is that when you're on the front foot, he will look better than Crowley. He will look back because I think he's got a better passing game. He looks like he can find a hole better. The issue for him is bridging the gap between Crowley's solidity and his solidity, which I think that's where he'll get when he gets time in the pocket. The other thing I would say is he missed a few pretty horrendous tackles at the end of the game. And I just want to, because he got a huge amount of praise yesterday. I thought he was good. He was really good in the first half. But I do think he's going to create a problem for himself down the line, because he actually made some good ones as well. Actually, he did make a few good tackles, but there was a few really bad ones where looked to me like he got out of the way of Dwayne van der Merwe. Understandable in fairness, but you got to, you know. And then there was obviously the one for the try at the end. I think it was he missed a you know, the try close to the line. That was an awful attempt at a tackle there as well. What he'll do is, as a 10, you're going to get targeted anyway. But if you start missing tackles like that, or not making the effort there, I think you'll really start to get targeted, and it becomes a problem for you. It becomes an issue for you your whole career if you get a name for doing it. So that's another thing he's got to kind of get a handle of fairly quickly. I know he's not a big guy, but, you know, he's well able to make the tackles. We've seen him make good ones too. So just a couple of things that, you know, when I'm watching, because we're obviously watching him very closely, and I just want to temper it a little bit, because I didn't think he was man of the match yesterday, and I thought he missed a few kicks he should have got as well off the deck. But he's definitely you can see where he can get to. I think you can kind of see, like,
just on the defense, just on the defense, Luke, like, how likely do you think it is that he really tightens up that part of his game and becomes a quality defender, or like a solid defender? Because we've seen some out halves who never really get to grips with that side of the game, and it follows.
It's massive, Will. It's massive. This is what I'm saying. This becomes a problem for you, because if someone like me is seeing it, like, you can, like, and I'm watching probably, you know, 2-3 games of rugby in a weekend. But imagine if you were in a video analysis watching the game. And you're watching, you know, probably, you know, 10 or 15 games a week or whatever. You know, you're watching games really, really closely. You're watching Prendergast's last 3 games before you make, or maybe his last 10 games, and you're going, lads, this guy doesn't like to tackle, you know, 50% of the time. If you just run at him all day, we're going to get pay here. And in a tight match, that can be the difference. But also, it makes your game tougher. Do you know what I mean? Because people start talking about it and thinking about it and go, well, let's get creative. Let's really find ways to expose this guy. And it just becomes a problem, because to me, Will, he's got potential. He's got the potential to be like a Sexton, because he's got the frame. He just needs to get the muscle on. But alongside the frame, you got to have the mindset with it too, that you want to put in the tackles, that you're looking forward to that part of the game. You're saying, yeah, test me. Brilliant. I'm looking forward to it. And that's where he's got to get to as well, because this guy, I think, could be an absolute superstar. But you can't have holes in your game, because in the big games, you know, they get exposed. They always get exposed. You know, you got to have the Michael Jordan mentality where, you know, yes, you might have, you know, 30 points a game, but you're going to lock down your opposition number as well. He's going to have 5 points. Do you know that kind of way? You have to have the elite two-way kind of mentality, I suppose they call it in basketball, you know, but you have to have that in rugby. Yeah.
Well, certainly be something to watch, and we'll be watching with interest to see if he does get selected for that Wales game. It was an interesting point about, you know, the likelihood of Ireland kind of going with a fairly settled team, because that has been a kind of hallmark of Andy Farrell's tenure. Obviously, Simon Easterby in the hot seat now, but that he has tended to keep changes to a minimum in windows. But we want to save some talking points for next week's show, because there's a break week, so we'll keep the rest of the team selection chat on ice for now. One thing before we finish up, Luke, though, we have got a lot of comments about you calling Jack Crowley Jack Crowley. Was that your experience growing up in Cork? Like, the amount of people who've been like, why is he calling him Crowley? It's not Crowley. It's not Crowley. So why do you call him Jack Crowley?
How do you spell? So if you see a bird outside, what do you call it? Do you call it a crow or a crow?
I thought you'd be calling him a crow, mate, like from where you grew up.
I actually have been switching a little bit, I think. I think I sometimes I forget. So a good pal of mine from school is Fionn Crowley. So it was always Crowley. So that's why my natural is to go Crowley, but obviously I know everyone else is Crowley. So sometimes I switch between the two. I like to have the option, Will.
Yeah, well, no, look, good to know. Good to finally get to the bottom of that age-old mystery. We might move on to England-France, guys. Jonathan, I'll go to you. Like, what a dramatic game. The quality, maybe not as high as you may expect, but in drama, it really lived up to the hype. England 26, France 25. I think there was 3 lead changes in the last 10 minutes. They were going punch for punch. But from a French perspective, Jonathan, like an utter disaster. Like, it's funny, in our Six Nations preview, I think it was myself, Luke and Rudd, we were talking about Ireland and winning at Six Nations and pressure, and I was like, what's the French version of the left wing talking about? Because France seriously need to deliver a title. One Six Nations title in the Galthie era, one Six Nations title generally since 2010. That's just not good enough for the talent they have. And I don't think I've seen a kind of a top team be as careless, kind of as wasteful, kind of lacking precision as France were. Like, to drop 3 or 4 scoring passes with the line beckoning is just absolutely criminal. And it really makes me question the overall mindset of the team. That game should have been put to bed. It should have been 28-0 after about 20 minutes. Instead, they got into a dogfight and like ended up kind of butchering a couple of more chances and then letting the lead slip for the first time with 10 seconds left on the clock. I think it's a disastrous outing for France, and it really leaves me kind of scratching my head about them. What did you make of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was an old school French performance in the sense that it harked back to those days whenever we would have always, the cliche would have been, you don't know what France is going to turn up, because they were, to my mind, so demonstrably better than England and so demonstrably more talented than England. But they didn't put that out in the pitch in terms of their execution, because they were making an incredible amount of handling errors. It was up near 30, 27, 28 handling errors, which is incredible for players, well, in any test environment, but incredible for players who are so good at that element of the game. Some of the things that we saw for them just looked very odd, like that attempted out the back pass from Movaka, and it didn't look like a test match in the Six Nations. It looked like a training set, the last 10 minutes of a training session when they were messing around, some of the things that were happening. And
but Jonathan, you know what? That's one of those training sessions where you kill each other after. And your coach, if you have a good coach, you'd be going, what are you doing? Do you know what I mean? If Movaka did that in a training session with Leinster back, or any of the teams I was on, you'd be going, do we not care?
Yeah.
Like, do we not care about, like, is this what we are, And I just thought I'd pull that one up, because when you say it's like a training session, you're like, well, the really great teams, they never do that in training. And it does beg the question, doesn't it? You go, well, how ruthless are they on themselves in training? And
France at their best under Galthie, like the year they won the Six Nations, they've actually won the same amount of Six Nations titles as Wales in the Fabien Galthié era, and Wales are like at absolute rock bottom. Like, it hasn't been this kind of devil-may-care swashbuckling style. Yes, there's been French flair, but it's actually been relatively pragmatic when they've been very good. They've kicked a lot. Like, they barely tested Marcus Smith under the high ball. I would have thought that would have been an obvious place to go. They were just kind of, as you said, like, and ironically, Movaka's out the back pass, they ended up scoring a try and after that.
That was actually,
which was hilarious. But it's just like, the balance was just not right for me at all. I just thought, like if you look back at the Galthié era, 2020, they beat Ireland and they beat England at home, and they lose to Scotland after their tight head prop throws a haymaker and gets sent off in the first half. In 2021, they go to Dublin, they win for the first time in 10 years. They lose to England with a late try from Maro Itoje, very similar fashion to the weekend. And then they also blow up at home to Scotland. They win the Grand Slam in 22. They lose to Ireland in a classic in 23. No shame there. 24, DuPont leaves. They get hammered by Ireland, and they draw with Italy at home in a game they should have lost. And then 2025, they completely throw that game away at the weekend. Like, that's a litany of near misses, self-inflicted, shooting your both feet to improve your dancing kind of haplessness that I thought they'd kind of got rid of. I don't know who wants to come in on that.
I thought the one thing I think around the pragmatism side, like, in hindsight, right, they didn't really need it, because they should have put away, if they put away 50% of those chances, they win that game by kind of between 15 and 20 points, right? So let's leave that aside. I thought it was amazing how they never went in the air. Really, they never really tested Marcus Smith in the air. Like, that's the first thing. As soon as I see Smith selected there, I'm going, well, okay. Kind of like I was talking about Prendergast. Well, let's not give him long kicks. or too many long kicks, because he's bloody dangerous with ball in hand. He's a lovely kicker. When he's got time, he's very dangerous in terms of his footwork, but also he can put other guys away. So let's not do that as much as possible. If we're going to do it, let's make sure we're very organized when we're chasing. But what's he not good at? He's small. He doesn't look unbelievably brave to me. Like, he's not a coward by any stretch, but he's not, like, I would say, let's really make him doubt, his credibility at fullback here. And let's put a few high balls on this guy. He's not a big guy, even if his technique's good. If we get a big guy down his channel, it's going to cause trouble and we're going to get good results from it. They didn't do that. As you say, there's a few things in the game where you're just saying, like, let's be pragmatic here. And I thought the kicking was actually quite poor. I thought Dupont's kicking was quite poor, which is generally, very, very solid. And just generally just kind of loose mistakes. And even with all that, you could see the difference in quality between the teams with, just flashes of brilliance from France. And look, the story of the game really is that, it's going to be the mistakes, but there was other parts in it where you're kind of saying, where was the detail there? Where was someone grabbing a hold of the game and saying, lads, let's cop the hell on here and let's close this thing out. And the last thing I'd mention is, and I thought it was quite maybe from Ireland's perspective might be a good thing, is I didn't think they looked unbelievably fit at the end, Will. Like, I know they went back down and got and got their noses in front again, but that was a soft enough, the last finish and the England try, it was an okay move, but it didn't. If you're defending for your life there, and if you're high energy at the end of the game, I don't think England get that score with that play. Like, maybe they break you down after 30 phases or something like that. But I would question their fitness a little bit, and they've got a few big boys in that pack. So I do wonder about that. So there's questions now over France. And look, the worrying thing is that, they can still come, and, you can see if a few of those passes stick and their tails are up, like, they can split you open. So you got to respect them, but they can be got at. And you would wonder, what the fitness levels are like.
Yeah, and I think they've dropped passes. Obviously, it's true to say 100%. If those passes stick, France probably run out comfortable winners. But it wasn't just the try-scoring passes that were being dropped. It was like symptomatic of the overall performance. Like, there was passes being dropped in midfield. There was, even Movaka's careless pass. Like, that was kind of symptomatic of just their general. It's kind of like a scatty performance where, like, they're simple passes as well. Like, they were like, BLBRA going for like a basketball little flick to Movaka. Like, that should have been a try 100 times out of 100. So yeah, it's a funny one to think. And I agree with you, Luke, completely about that last England try, in the sense that, like, when the ball comes off that maul, France are still, you'd think, in a relatively comfortable position. And it goes from that to under the sticks in a couple of passes. It was a really. And, like, the defense, it's so funny because Sean Edwards came on TV afterwards, and you're, oh God, this should be fireworks. And he was like, what a test match. Wow. Like, I'm sure he's saying different things internally, but I just thought it was hilarious. His reaction, I thought he'd be absolutely bullying on TV. He was able to restrain himself somewhat. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'd like, Jonathan, I'm not mad of the end game where the best scrum half who's ever lived is playing out half to see out the match. I kind of said it last week, like, I know some French nines have played 10 before, like Michalak and Elisal used to play kind of both positions, but I know Dupont didn't have his best game, and Le Garec is a quality player, but I want Antoine Dupont at the fulcrum of the game the whole time, if that's possible. Not playing out of position. I know he kind of wants to play out of position sometimes, but to me that was kind of a bit of mismanagement as well.
I do feel the need to preface this with obviously professional test rugby coaches know more about rugby than I do.
Oh, well, we couldn't even have a show, Jonathan, if we had to say
Jonathan, having been in some of those rooms, not always the case.
But that said, like, the Six Nations so far, one of the hallmarks of it to me over the first 2 weeks has just been this muddled thinking from coaches and square pegs into round holes. We've seen it with the Wales 10 situation. Obviously, in Scotland, it was the injury to Piloto, but Jordan was going to play 12. He's a 10. England moving Marcus Smith to fullback when he's not a fullback to try and get him into the team. Even France, having Rumat in the second row when he's a back row. Now, thankfully, it's something that Ireland have gone away with. Ireland have such quality in every position that they're not doing it. Previous Ireland teams would have tried to find a way to get all three of those centres into the game rather than have Gary Ringrose on the bench. They're not doing that now. But it feels like every other country in the competition is, and I don't think we're ever seeing it work. And Dupont to 10 was just another one of those examples. I think the idea that there's this sort of positional fluidity in rugby, like, I don't see the evidence of it. And I think it's costing teams whenever they're trying to get their 15 best players onto the park rather than get their best team onto the park.
Yeah, like Garek did have a big hand in the try to put them ahead, but it just like I didn't see Antoine Dupont playing out half the way you would see an out half play in that end game and kind of like dictating things so much. He was kind of floating. He also popped up in that last pass to play as well. Obviously, like outstanding player, but yeah, I wonder what the thought process is on that one. Like they didn't have a proper out half on the bench, but Thomas Ramos was still on the pitch. Sorry, so like Ramos could easily have gone to 10. He's played 10 loads of times for Toulouse with distinction. Like I think that would have been better. Like maybe they wanted Lara Gorek's energy because he does create stuff, but
he's very good.
He's class.
He's actually pretty good when he came on.
No, he is class, but I'm just saying, like, was he so good that it meant taking Dupont out of 9, putting him to 10? Like, in the aggregate, are you ultimately adding to the overall package? Potentially, maybe Galthie would say, look, I think we are. And as Jonathan said, he's the coach, not me. But I just...
Excuse the ignorance, Will. Is it, what's the story with Ntamak? Is it a long injury?
No, he got suspended for that red card in the first week.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So what is it? 2 games, 3 games, or what is it?
Yeah, so he'll be back for the Ireland game.
Still to be determined how many France games he misses, depending on whether they can count the Toulouse game in the middle as part of that suspension.
They definitely will. They definitely will count that, I'm sure. So they'll try to get it back.
You hope. Sorry, you would hope. You want to see them at their best. Like I do think. So the one thing I did want to say about it is, it looked like a performance that was kind of lacking a little bit of leadership. And sometimes you do one, like Dupont is a guy who's like an actions guy, but I think he has one way he plays the game, and it's just like ferocious, like from minute 0 to 80, and he's up, he's in the physical, he's making breaks, he's doing all the kind of magical stuff. Sometimes I wonder, like, do they really miss like a really steady hand at the tiller in Ntamak in the big games? Just to grab the game with a scruff of the neck a little bit. Now I know he's a magical player too, can kind of make big breaks, but I think he has the ability to control the game too. And I do wonder that sometimes. I think they lacked a little bit of leadership to me. Usually kind of Aldred and that would be able to kind of control them, but it didn't seem to be the case. Like I didn't see, when you see a huddle or something like that in a game, and you see someone kind of reading the riot act going, lads, cop the hell on, let's hang on to the ball. Now, maybe it's because the mistakes were coming from everyone, but, so maybe you didn't feel like you could say, lads, like, I know I'm messing up too, but, come on, let's really focus the minds now. I just didn't see that with the team. The way you can see with the great teams, the Englands, the New Zealands, the South Africas, they seem to be able to gather the game. Or even with Ireland on the weekend against Scotland, I mentioned the little bit of leadership when they went through that pressure period where, Scotland take the kick and they kind of just walk nice and slow up to the halfway line, just took the sting out, just little smart things like that. I just don't see that with this French team sometimes in the big games. And they need to get it, because, like, I wonder, like, does Galthie come under pressure for you? Like, if he loses against Ireland,
if France go to Dublin and lose, and you're looking at that's six seasons, won Six Nations title with the quality they've had, I think he has to come under pressure. As I said,
and I think the World Cup, like, as great as South Africa are, some of the mistakes in that game, guys, you know what I mean? South Africa do that to everyone. They did it to Ireland in the summer. You know what I mean? Like, if you make a mistake with a kick or something, like, they're all over them. But, like, just at that stage, home World Cup, I just wondered if someone looked back, as you say, Will's looking at the totality of the regime. You're kind of saying, well, like, what have they really got to show for what I would consider on their day? I think they might be on their day the best team in the world. I honestly do believe. I believe that.
Bernard Laporte won 4 Six Nations titles in 6 years in the noughties. This French team have won 1 Six Nations title in 5 years, and depending on how this year's goes, it could be 6. No one can tell me that this team is like markedly worse. Now, the noughties team was class, no doubt, but this team, I will put it alongside them in terms of man for man, talent for talent, and yet the French team then won lots of Six Nations titles in an era where, England were winning the World Cup, Ireland were pretty competitive, albeit not the force obviously they are now. Wales were winning Grand Slams, and France still won a lot of silverware, whereas this French team I went through some of the games earlier on this journey, have found ways to kind of, and it hasn't just been defeats, it's often been blow-ups. Like the Ireland one in 2023 is the only one you'd be like, oh, that was just a great game, 2 teams toe-to-toe, and they lost. All the other ones you're kind of looking at being like, God, they really blew that one, or oh, God, they made a lot of mistakes in that one. So I'd be interested to see what his kind of the pressure valve is like on him as this tournament goes on. That's still to say, though, that they can still win this Six Nations. That game in Dublin, Ronan O'Gara said it yesterday on BBC that the one team that can probably come to the Aviva and win is France. So not, kind of discounting them, but at this juncture, it's not looking good for Fabien Galthié.
Well, I think, they've got a generational club side to pick from. That Toulouse side won their first Champions Cup in 2021. So you can make the argument that France, with the bones of that Toulouse side, have been the best side talent-wise in the Six Nations 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025. To win one Six Nations title from that run with that level of club side and with somebody who's being talked about as the best player in the world, and I've seen headlines saying the best player ever, that's a poor return. And it's almost as if, exactly like you say, Will, there's been, I suppose, mitigation in some of the games. It's whether they've played Ireland. Really, the Ireland and Marseille game was the one that they should have won, that being at home. And then, they could have said that they had 2 titles, which would have been maybe par for the course as a return. But I think if they only win one Six Nations title through the time when Toulouse have been such a good side and Dupont has been the best player in the world, I think questions have to start to be asked regardless. And then you couple that with the...
But even La Rochelle as well, Jonathan, that's such a good point that you make. Like, La Rochelle have been top of the pops as well. So, it's not like they've ever had the team that's not the best. Yeah, I had never thought about it like that.
And what really kind of hammers home, obviously Dupont is Dupont, and he missed the Six Nations last year, but the team was a rabble. Without him, he's unbelievable. But it's not as if they don't have any other good scrum halves that they could. They got hammered by Ireland. They barely beat Scotland, if people remember. They probably shouldn't have. There was a TMO decision at the end that really could have gone against them. They should have lost to Italy as well if that retake had been given, which it should have been by the law. So they could have easily, their Six Nations could have actually been a lot worse last year. That was the one that really hammered home maybe what's Galthier's grip like on this team, because with Dupont's absence, it's almost as if that gave them license to be oh, look, we can't win now, or oh God, it's going to be an off year now. So I think they have a huge work to do. They have a break week, they have Italy, and a break week. So they should be primed coming to Dublin. Ntamack will be back. They should have, a full team to pick from. So it's a massive game for them in Dublin. Obviously for Ireland too, but I feel like this Galthié era and the project, all of a sudden, it could be done if they don't win that game. Luke, from England's point of view then, Finn Smith got the knotted out half. He really grew into the game as it wore on. I think the cohesion with the Northampton players in the back line, him and Tommy Freeman looked to be really on the same wavelength. They picked off that nice try, and then the lovely little delayed pass for the winner. Have England kind of settled finally now on their right man, you think?
I think they have. Now, I would say I think he was a little shaky, Will, which is to be expected. It's a huge game. A lot of pressure on that England team. They really needed a win. I think we talk about Galthié. That has bought Borthwick, I think, some much needed breathing room. I think he was under massive pressure. So yeah, no, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, I think I think he's better suited to the role just in terms of what he is as a player. And I think we've seen some big games where he's produced well. Obviously, the Northampton Munster one is obviously one that sticks in the memory. So yeah, and look, I just think I really like Smith as a player, but as a rugby player, and I think he probably, to my mind, is a bench guy for me, an impact guy, rather than actually my starter. Now I know that'll ruffle a few feathers, but I think if you think about the great England teams, they generally have a bit more of a steady hand at the tiller, someone who's a bit more reliable. And I think Finn Smith would bring you that. And I think he'll run the team a little bit better. He's a bit more of a kind of, Smith is a real kind of moments guy. I don't know if he's going to take you from 0 to 80 minutes without some kind of, some lows. You'll have some great highs, but you might have some big lows as well. Whereas Finn Smith, I think he'll kind of be a bit more even keel. I think he's a better fit for the English mentality. So, to my, he should be the guy. And of course, I like that 9-10 combination. I always think that's a decent thing to have, isn't it? Because you have that understanding week to week, and it's two, the two positions are just absolutely pivotal. I talked about the France thing. I do think it's having the two guys playing week in week out together. I do think it's important. It's a nice thing to have. You can get over it, but it's definitely nicer to have two who are very familiar with each other. So yeah, interesting to see how this develops, to see if this England team can kind of push on in the competition. They've obviously got, a pretty favourable draw, and they're actually right in the mix now, aren't they? That's the thing. Like the two scores against Ireland at the end of the game actually, take on a new level of importance. So we watch them closely. I think they might struggle against Scotland. I think Scotland have the ability to bounce back. I think they need Finn Russell back, but that's going to be the kind of litmus for me, Will, is that I think they've kind of hung in well when they really shouldn't have against Ireland and France. You could clearly see they were the worst team in both games, but somehow they've managed to kind of claw something out of it. So they're actually in a decent position, aren't they? I mean,
yeah, it's funny, like
quietly, like
England being on 6 points, considering like with 5 minutes left against Ireland, they were coming away with 0 points, and with 30 seconds left against France, they were coming away with 1 point. So they ended up turning 1 point out of six into 6 points, which is, and as you say, they're at home to Scotland. I think they have Italy at home, and then they finish with Wales away. So they'll be watching that game at the Aviva Stadium eagerly, and like those kind of cheap scores Ireland conceded could end up being, pretty vital. It is funny, like I mentioned Sean Edwards' interview earlier. Steve Borthwick came in just before him. If you'd watched the two of those interviews and not known the score, you would have thought France had won and England had lost, because Edwards was waxing lyrical about how great a game it was, and Steve Borthwick was just kind of making excuses for how young the team is. That's his go-to thing, is how young our side is. There was very little jubilation, or maybe that's born from the fact that they beat Ireland last year in a very similar circumstances, and then it led to a very much a false dawn and a lengthy losing run. But the fixtures do line up pretty well for them, so it'll be interesting to see how kind of live their title chance is as we go forward. Just to finish up, guys, Jonathan, I'll go to you. Like Wales, 14 defeats in a row now, 22-15 against Italy. Like that scoreline very much flatters Wales. They were fairly abject. Conditions were terrible. Italy managed them well, kicked a lot of 3-pointers, then missed 3 penalties in a row in the second half just to leave the door slightly ajar. But Wales were never really serious contenders in that game at all. So many problems. They don't have the players really, but as you said earlier, it doesn't help that they're picking Ben Thomas, a centre at out half, and having Gareth Anscombe, a guy who could be there alongside his clubmate Thomas Williams to offer a bit of cohesion at halfback, not involved. I don't see how Warren Gatland survives past the end of the Six Nations.
No, I don't either. It's incredible how it's all ended, really. If you think back, the last time Warren Gatland was probably under this much pressure was whenever he was in charge of Ireland. He lost that job 24 years ago. It's incredible longevity in a coaching career to have been, I suppose, not unquestioned, but to be in a position of relative security in one of the most professions lacking security that you can have, I suppose, in professional coaching. But I don't know how much of it is him. I think the point that you make, Will, is that they just don't have the players. Like, there's players that aren't playing an awful lot of even regional rugby, being asked to step up, not from Champions Cup into Test rugby, but from ERC, sometimes benching in the ERC to play Test rugby. And you can just see that they're not ready for that level. Like some of the naivety that they've shown over the past 2 weeks is just not befitting of the highest level of rugby. It was especially evident in defence against France, I thought, where they just allowed themselves to get so narrow. I think against Italy, there was so much talk in the build-up about who was the favourites and who deserved to be the favourites that what got lost, I think, in that discussion was the fact that if you compare the sides on paper, Italy just have better players. Whatever about Wales' losing run, whatever about the internal problems in Welsh rugby, whatever about the direction or faith that people have in the coaching ticket, Italy just have better players. Like Wales, talent-wise, are the worst team in this competition.
And when you look at the team sheets, it's not even close. Even that Italy team sheet, you're thinking, like, how far down the list do you go until you pick a Welsh player? Like probably 5, 6, 7, 8. Then you might get the Jack Morgan. Or maybe he'd be slightly higher, to be fair. But yeah, it's certainly very, very, very stark when you look at the two team sheets from the weekend. But I do think when it cuts to the coaches box and you see Rob Howley and Warren Gatland there together, and Wales are struggling to create absolutely anything, notwithstanding the conditions were poor, you're thinking, God, like, They've literally have the same coaching ticket that was in place in 2008 to a degree. Obviously, Sean Edwards was there too, but like at the top of the tree and in the attack coach role from like 17 years ago, which is pretty crazy to think about. Luke, I'll give you the last word. Wales, what do you make of where they are?
Look, I think what's really come home to roost is that the regional game and the lack of cohesion, lack of investment, whatever it is, like they might not have been able to invest, but what's gone on in the regional game has finally come home to roost. I think that's really what it is. I think they were producing some fairly miraculous results for a long period of time with that coaching staff. And I think the key point is I don't think it reflects too much on those guys. I just don't think they've got the personnel guys, and I think that's because of what's going on in the game locally. Like you think about what Ireland produce, and yeah, look, we moan about Ulster maybe at times, maybe not getting some results on that, but generally speaking, like the game here, the teams generally produce or compete. Like Munster have won a few leagues. Like Leinster, we know what Leinster are producing and how much kind of quality comes through the ranks there all the time, but they haven't got the wins, and we do moan about that a lot. But generally speaking, the setup here is fairly consistent. The teams are always going to be, there's always going to be one or two Irish teams at least competing, if not three, at the very end of the year in the league competition. And you can kind of see the investment and the structures that are in place here and the crowds that come to the games. There's still, even though Ulster are having a tough period at the moment, there's still good crowds going there. Obviously, it's hard to judge Connacht at the moment, but you can see like they're building a new stadium. There's stuff happening in the game here. I just feel like the state of the game is very much a reflection of what's going on the ground, and you have to have a solid foundation to see the results at the top of the game. And I think what they were producing probably masked over some of the big issues in the game in Wales for a long period of time. And now we see what's kind of been when all those experienced, brilliant players kind of retire, what's below it and what's been generated below it is just not there. They just haven't got the raw materials at the moment. So it's a rebuild. It's like a Manchester United job for me. It's a proper rebuild, and it's not a 1 or 2 year job. Someone in there has got to take a long-term view. It's whether you can last in the job long enough with results like the weekend, because I think you're right. Like, I mean, even at the end, it was like a little sweaty at the end when Italy, when they concede the try and they get the yellow card, you're kind of going, ooh, like they couldn't, could they? Because they were so dominant for most of the game. But like, yeah, it's how long you can last with results like that, Will, in the job. And it's sad because Wales is such a powerhouse of rugby, like some of the greatest names in the game, similar to Australia, just in a tough situation. Australia looked like they're in a better situation than Wales now, but not that much better. And two big powerhouses under pressure. So two big jobs, got to take a long-term view and take some short-term pain.
Yeah, well, it's going to get even worse, I think. Next one, they play Ireland in Cardiff in 2 weeks' time. But for now, I'd like to thank Luke and Jonathan for joining me on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. We will be back next week to look ahead to that game in Cardiff. But for now, thanks so much for listening and goodbye.